we are going to rank the 12 rules for life. Number 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back. So I know that the point here is being prepared to be attacked or prepared to be competitive if that's what the situation requires, not being weak. I don't care because I'm just looking at these as written. And I actually think probably paying attention to your posture is better advice just because it's a more universal thing. Like, I'll tell you what, you might get by on being a funny person. You might get by on being a nice person. You might be cute. There's a lot of ways to get through this world. And it's not always by challenging and being competitive and being ready to scrap it out. That's often what happens. And that may be required of most people some of the time, or really everyone some of the time. I just don't think it's so universal that it's the number 1 rule for life, right? Because that's what it's claiming to be, right? But a contender perhaps literally pay attention to your posture, like stand up straight with your shoulders back. This is good for your back, literally your physical back. You see people with bad posture, well, that creates pain in your body that is going to make you cranky and crotchety, and it's going to kill you. You know, it's a, oh shit, they've found me. I have always struggled with very bad posture, some of it created by my emotional situation, that when I was young, I was very introverted and frightened and meek, and I wouldn't ever make eye contact, and I never stood up straight. I would kind of hide my belly, my big fat belly as it was when I was a kid. I was quite overweight and very ashamed of it and very frightened of people making fun of me, so I would hide that. You know, when I'd go to the swimming pool, I wouldn't take my shirt off. Like people wouldn't know I was fat until I took my shirt off, right? But that insecurity would manifest physically, and that's fine, whatever. The trouble is that creates a habit of poor, sloppy posture, that it creates an alignment in your physical body that then is sort of addictive in quality, that you then have to put extra effort into correcting that instead of just having it right in the first place. So for me, for some reason, my shoulders tend to like pop outward and sag outward, so I always have to remind myself to kind of tuck them in, and that makes them fall back. Number 1, it's either A or B. It's a good one. I have no fundamental issue with it. It's not entirely capturing its entire meaning in the statement itself, and that's part of it. You know, they just have to be articulated well. I believe one of them is to be precise in your speech. That's number 10, so I'm gonna have to dock you on your own system here. If I have to read the book to understand. Let's go ahead and put that in A, because I'm gonna be nice, because I don't know what's coming next. I think that a good parent generally does teach this, and they teach this in the military, so it's not like a secret, it's a thing that people kind of know, and it's a good reminder. It would be a good thing to tattoo on your foot or something like that. But there's many things like that. Number 2, treat yourself like someone who you are responsible for helping. I'm gonna do everyone in that voice. I think, honestly, you should treat yourself even better than that. Two things. If someone were my boss and they were telling me to do something, I'd get her done. I'd make sure and actually follow through with it and finish it, and I'd do the best job that I could do. But if I had an idea, like a YouTube video or a band or something, if there's something that was just my own personal desire to do something, I wouldn't give it quite as much, and it would be harder to motivate myself. I think this is very common. When the motivation is entirely intrinsic, it's like you don't really care about yourself as much as you care what other people think, honestly. I think it's better. I think it's more healthy if you can get the energy or the time or somehow figure out to really serve your own desires. And I think that this is what makes life really profound and meaningful, is when you're really just, you're doing this because it's your thing. It really gives me a lot of energy and makes my life so much more tolerable for me to feel like I have the agency to say, I'm not just doing this because I have to in order to survive. I'm not just doing this because it's the thing to do or because that was how I was raised. I'm doing this because I believe in it. I'm doing this because I want to do this. And so now I'm splitting myself into 2 people, and one person is the person who wants and needs, has this need that I want to do something remarkable with my life, let's say. And then you have this other person that's now your boss. It's like, well, if you want that, you're going to have to do this and this and this, which is going to be boring, and it's going to be hard, and you're not going to feel like doing it at the time, and it's going to make you nervous. You're going to embarrass yourself, and some people are going to resent you for it, and they're going to be mean to you, and that's just what's up. You're going to go to jobs, you're going to leave jobs, you're going to get fired from jobs, you're going to work different jobs, but you're always going to be working for yourself. You're always going to be working to secure your own needs and that of your environment, your family, whatever you have to do. So it's to a certain extent, you always are your own boss. So if you just make that official, like, okay, now let's actually give myself the sort of responsibility that I would give to a boss, and let's actually take ourselves as seriously as we would take a boss seriously. That's hard to do, and definitely not everyone does that. The part of me that comes out and gets playful when I write a song is definitely not the same part that forces me to rehearse over and over again and get ready for the gig. Do I want my boss to drive me really hard? And in which case I might be experiencing various forms of fatigue, physical fatigue, emotional fatigue. Or do I want like a more nurturing boss? It's all right, just, make sure you get this thing done eventually. The deadline's not that important. It's about learning, and do you want to be that kind of boss? Do you need that kind? 2 is treat yourself like you are in a relationship with yourself. When you're in a relationship, there's this sort of devotion that you have, and this sort of it can be unhealthy at times, but I'm the more healthy side of it. The idealized person, you become more forgiving of the negative aspects and more accepting of the positive aspects. You believe in that person, and we can do that as long as we're dealing with another person. But many of us are somewhat fractured inside because of the way we were brought up, or the sort of internalized self-criticism. It's very difficult for us to believe in ourselves or to place ourselves on a pedestal of care like we would for a relationship partner or a lover or someone that you're attracted to and trying to win their favor. If you could apply the same energy and the same love to yourself that you would for someone that you want to be with, I think that you'd be better off in the long run. You'd probably end up with better relationships in general. And again, it's this sort of internal splitting. Like there's the you that's seeking an idealized other, and there's the you that already is that idealized other. And they sort of come together understanding that this is not the truth, but this is just one way of seeing the multiplicity of the self. And you can actually have somewhat of like a romantic relationship with yourself, that you have sentimental moments that are just for you, and you have your own inside jokes. It's just your own internal world. It's the only place you'll ever be. It's your home. If it doesn't feel like a home to you, if it's not a place that you really love to be, then you're going to suffer for sure. So those are the 2 ways that I would frame treat yourself like you're someone you're responsible for helping, the second of the 12 rules for life. As far as being your own like patient, I haven't read this book, understand. I think that might be kind of where he's going with it. And in spite of it being really one of my rules for life in another twist, and as articulated, I don't think it's all that great. I'm going to put that in the D tier. I don't think it's bad advice, but I just think it's a little convoluted, and without reading the book, it isn't exactly clear what that rule for life means. Rule number 3, make friends with people who want the best for you. How do you know when you're making friends whether they want the best for you? I think there's a lot of capacity for going wrong there, and probably in the act of making friends, there might be better indicators of whether you want to make friends with that person or not. I don't know how uncommon or common this is, but I don't really struggle with that problem. I find that if people want the best for me, I generally am their friend already and will sort of go out of my way to continue that friendship. And this can be used in a sort of manipulative way where people sort of signal like they want the best for you. And then once you're kind of on the line, it sort of diminishes over time. There's sort of what you would call a honeymoon period to friendship in a lot of cases. A lot of the time, it seems to me like the best friends can be of that nature. They can also be sort of challenging. They can be sort of people who see you clearly, and they want the best for you in the sense of kind of challenging the parts of you that they're more critical of. It seems like kind of a no-brainer. Like if you're a person who thinks critically about the people you spend time with, if you're a person who is even aware of whether a friendship is toxic or not, that's going to sort of be an automatic sign. So maybe, a better number 3 would be like, evaluate your friends on whether they're harmful or helpful to you. But as written, I'm going to go ahead and put this one in the D tier. I don't really see how it's actionable, and I don't really see why I need it and why it isn't something that people sort of automatically do. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. That hardly rolls from the tongue. It's very verbose. Covet not thy neighbor sort of rule. So it's sort of already covered in the commandments, but that's not a rule that it can't be in the commandments. But if we're playing that game, maybe thou shalt not murder would be a good. Maybe that ought to be on this list. But I think it's kind of an issue we have today, that there's a lot of envy in the world. It's a very comparing one another to one another sort of time, and there's a large wedge in the middle class, where you're either getting filthy rich right now or you're falling into poverty right now. And I think that's a magnified thing now. It's just my own social commentary. There is a tendency to a great deal of envy, some of it generated by the social system, but some of it just basically narcissism. And so that's what this would be referring to is, I'm a musician, and all musicians are kind of always looking at those superlative musicians and saying, damn, I wish I was as good as Jimmy Page, or I wish I was as good as Tame Impala, or, some big rapper right now that I don't know. But we tend to compare ourselves to like the stars, who are people who are like born gifted and go through the perfect set of circumstances. And so you really couldn't possibly be that person. And so you feel defeated because you are just what you are, doing your best, and it's not enough. Just compare yourself to your own capacities and your own what you could possibly be, rather than the impossible game of comparing yourself up against the best of the best in the billions of people who are all struggling to be the best. Maybe not all of them, but a great deal of them are trying to be the best at something. And so your probabilities of being the big fish in the big pond is very, very low. But in your local area, you might be undervaluing yourself, and you might be undervaluing what you are to a lot of people and what you are to your community. As it sits now, let's call it a C tier, because I don't find it useless. Actually, I kind of do find it useless. I'm gonna go ahead and throw that one in. If they're all D tier, it's gonna look like I hate this. So let's put that one into C. I'm just gonna put that in C because C is lonely there. It doesn't have any traffic. Number 5, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. So I don't have any children. To be generous, I interact with all walks of life, and there are children in my life. I have been a music teacher. You often teach music to children. Parents think it's important for children to play music, even though nobody thinks it's important for adults to play music. And playing music makes you like your children. I believe that children kind of have their own character. They take on a life of their own as early, from the womb, like from birth. Kids are their own person. I believe that. And there's a lot of nature, there's a lot of nurture. Children sometimes will not be compatible with their parents, and they won't have the same values, and they'll always be in conflict to some extent because of that, and they'll like require therapy to even like live under a roof, in the worst case scenario. As just a throwaway bit of advice, I think it's brilliant, and it's something that I think it's great for parents to hear, because they'll immediately recognize, like, oh yeah, like, my little girl was being a bitch. Like, that pisses me off. Like, that's no good. I don't want that to be supported. But then you get into like, well, what do you do though? You don't let them. What does that mean? Like, you're not in control. Their children are out of control. They are maniacs, and a lot of what they do, they don't know why they do it. They're just being crazy, or they're following an example that someone set. Maybe you are that person, or maybe that person someone even didn't even see. The idea that you have so much control over your child that they would never do something that makes you dislike them, that gives me the sense of like a tyrannical parent. Maybe it's something that you've focused on a lot in your life and that you've tried to rid yourself of. Well, they have a lot of years to go through of life before they should be expected to be at your level of awareness. It's oftentimes those things that are really a reflection of the parents' values and not values that would exist natively in a young child that really messes kids up. I think when parents are trying to mature them too fast or hold them to the expectations of an adult, when all they're just literally pleasure-seeking gremlins that don't really care about ethics per se, like they want to have the narcissistic fantasy that they're ethical people, but they're just little gremlins. They're little snot-nosed brats, and they just want to have fun and eat candy. I mean, so that makes me dislike them. Right? So, but I love them too, because I love the chaos, and it reminds me that, you know, life is now. It's not what we're working toward. It's where we are now. The child is the father of the man, and this is one of the reasons why I loved teaching music so much, is because it would always kind of remind me just of that sense of novelty and everything, and that, like, in my cynical perspective, it's like I tend to hate everything that's happening. You know, everything bothers me. Like every new song that comes out, it's like, oh, that, you know, lame. That pattern again. I'm annoyed by that pattern by this point, and that it's still successful because it's pandering. You know, every movie that comes out feels like that. You know, like in South Park when, you know, like Stan's depressed and he's walking around and his parents are divorced, and he's walking around, and like everything that happens in the media is just like a duck shitting out its mouth at the audience, and everyone's like, hey, that's great. But that's a perspective, and what I remember when I'm around kids is like, that's just a perspective. You can snap out of that. There's plenty of people that aren't in that. It isn't the generation. It's not real. It's not the time that we're in. It's where I am, and it's where my peers are. It's available to everybody at every time to experience that novelty, to allow the inner child to come out for a playtime. So I'm very cautious. Like I do follow this rule for life. I'm very careful about letting children do anything that makes me dislike them. But at the same time, that only goes so far, and it's a two-way street. They're fighting their own fight, which is to get me to chill out and have a good time and allow them to eat the candy so that they can jump up and down until they hurt themselves, and then they cry and they scream and they have a tantrum, and they just don't make any logical sense. So because I like it, but because I think it's sort of inappropriate, let's cram that into a B tier, maybe a B tier. Rule number 6, set your own house in perfect order before you criticize the world. He specifically uses the word perfect. I don't think it's a good idea to try and make your own house perfect ever. Like, not even before anything, but just like being type A, basically, or being imposing on your family, because this is referring to family as well. Your house, your household, you know, as the paterfamilias of the house. I think maybe acceptable order. I think that's good advice. But, you know, at the same time, I know people who, you know, did a really good job in certain aspects of their life, and their house was just a filthy mess, and they didn't really know what they were doing, and they were just kind of flying by the seat of their pants all the time. I mean, is that necessarily the worst thing in the world? So I don't know how, like, universal. I am familiar with the clean your room that, like, if you don't know what to do, you can always do what's in your own court to do, that you can take care of things at home. In this case, you're talking to people probably that have a lot of time on their hands. And not everybody does. And some people live in kind of chaotic household situations. Maybe they have other people making messes, and maybe, like, for you to keep your own house in order would imply you doing a lot of work for other people, and you being in constant conflict with your environment, with the people around you, because you need to keep things in perfect order, right? I've recognized it as sort of a pitfall that before I tackle things that are really meaningful to me, I always have to make sure, you know, that I've eaten a nice meal, and that my room's all picked up and everything's clean, and I've done all the crap I have to do on the mail, and all my bills are paid and everything. Depending on, you know, what your circumstances are, you can spend like nearly all your time on housekeeping, and sometimes you would be better off going after your dream right now than worrying about the little stuff and the immediate stuff and the local stuff. That sometimes you kind of have to zoom out your perspective, look at the entire system that you're inhabiting, and be like, well, wait, you know, could this be just fundamentally made more acceptable? Do I need to, like, rebuild this whole machine? Is it the case that I need to jump on everything while I'm young? Because that's another general truism. You could just as soon say the opposite, you know, do what you're here to do, and don't sweat the small stuff, don't fuss over little things, don't try and create perfection that'll never last in your own little limited sandcastle, because it's all just that thing is just a transitory thing, but the work that you do, the imprint that you leave on the world, is the significance that you have to contribute. I do think that number 6, maybe I'm not understanding it perfectly, but I think it's actually bad advice. I guess maybe I am misunderstanding, but I don't really see the value of it. I don't really see what it does for you. I find that pointless busy work around the house is sort of a procrastination thing, and the idea of perfect order is bad. So this one, just because I'm probably not going to put anything else in F tier, let's put this motherfucker in F tier. Number 7, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. This one seems to reinforce what I just said about number 6. It seems to be kind of the opposite truism, that you should go after what's meaningful, not like tackling the easiest thing on your to-do list, but actually going straight for the hardest thing on your to-do list. So pursuing what is meaningful, is that important? I don't know. I sort of struggle with this one. Maybe like it's sort of just an element of narcissism that we think that we have some holy grail, or as Campbell or Peterson might put it, to go descend into the abyss and slay the dragon. Maybe we really don't need to do that at all. Maybe we just need to kind of be emotionally available and do the work that's not really the crazy hardest work in the world, and maybe just keep everything afloat. I'm just kind of trying to think of like a Hawaiian sort of attitude about things. Maybe like take care of everything, and you're going to die. That's going to happen. Try to avoid it for a while. Try to protect others for the most part, but everything's falling apart. That's the nature of reality. But dig it while it's here, pursue what is meaningful. But I don't think, I think there's a little bit of dialectic here. Don't do anything that kind of seems pointless to you, that you're just doing it because there's like pressure on you to do it. I think that seems to be where this is coming from. So being that I have to like unpack it that hard, and that I might still be wrong about it, it might be a sort of unclear. Also, 10% negative points for having a parentheses in it. I don't care for that. There shouldn't be a parenthetical aside. That's inappropriate to naming a rule for life. Like, is it in there or not? Why is it like, hey, psst, psst, It is also somewhat of a bromide. It's somewhat of a cliche. And I think that we're already like up to our neck in that, in American culture, that everyone thinks they have to do something remarkable. And it's almost like pathological to a certain extent, that like, then if your life doesn't seem meaningful, if you just wash dishes and have good friends, then you're not living life to the fullest. So many of us are experiencing, a lot of self-loathing and are feeling very punished by the notion that what we have been capable of in our life thus far has not been all that meaningful, and to the extent that it has fulfilled our expectations for what a meaningful life ought to be. And so maybe we ought to adjust those expectations, or, maybe we ought to just try harder, but you definitely can't say that to everybody. This one is a bit serpentine. I don't think it's crazy important to keep that in mind, to pursue what's meaningful. I think that some people are driven by meaning and some people are not. And I don't think it's a good universal rule for people. It's sort of more something that would apply to like an intellectual type that needs a little bit of encouragement and validation, which would be, Peterson's audience. I'm gonna go ahead and put that one in hell yeah, let's put that motherfucker in F tier. You know what? Because like a rule for life should be something that you need to remind yourself of. I don't know about you guys, but I don't really need someone to tell me to do what's meaningful. It's like, well, no shit. I'm bored out of my mind. Like, God, please help me figure out how to do something meaningful. And that all seems very natural to me and possibly neurotic. So I don't think I need a rule for life to tell me that. Squeaking on through, number 8. Tell the truth, or at least Morty or at least don't lie. Okay, buddy, with the dash there. I just was whining about the parentheses. If you're doing rules for life, I want them to be pretty much just a sentence. Well, like negotiating on your rules for life. I mean, you get into obviously the honesty versus truthfulness. If I were simply telling the truth all the time, you have the movie Liar, Liar. You're constantly being a jerk because oftentimes the first and most noticeable thing is a negative thing that we have a super ego for a reason. There's a reason why it was not acceptable to be a precocious child and to shout, "Oh, you're a really big fat person, aren't you?" When you have this sort of mythological relationship to truth where it's a virtue and you have to do it all the time, I think that can be quite toxic. What exists in your mind as the truth is so multifaceted, and whatever you choose to communicate is a complicated algorithm of deciding what actually comes out your mouth, which part of the truth, and the extent to which it is true. And there's no certainty to anything that you think or say. There never is. There's always some degree of like, it's not that I'm lying, it's that I actually don't know. And so I'm selecting a version of the truth that makes the most sense or is the most self-serving. So I think there's a lot of degrees to that, and I'm actually quite opposed. I've actually made it like a practice of my own to be more dishonest. Maybe I'm in a bad mood. I'm going to try my best not to wear that on my sleeve and admit that to the world. I'm not into positivity as a general. Again, I think that goes too far. Always be positive. Always be happy. I think that's a form of bullshitting. I think that's a form. It's a dishonest thing. If you even pull that off, if you manage to only say positive things on your social media and always appear to be positive, you're kind of creating a condition of jealousy where you're misleading people to think like, wow, this person has it so great and they're so happy all the time. What am I doing wrong? Well, what you're doing wrong is you're not lying constantly about how you feel. So I'm not super into positivity, and I'm not super into truthfulness, even though it sounds like, okay, so you're a cynical jerk. Sure. I mean, if that's what people are like, I'm a person. If I'm telling a lie to get some benefit unfairly, obviously that's an unethical thing to do. I've never really struggled with that. I was kind of brought up in a condition where lying was not really necessary. If the Nazis come knocking at my door asking if I have any Jewish parentage, I'm going to lie to them. And I don't see anything wrong with that. What could you actually say as a rule of life for honesty? I think that's a very important rule of life to have, whatever your setting is, however high your conscientiousness is, however much it's going to eat at your soul to not represent yourself honestly and truthfully. I would feel robbed if I were, a successful public speaker who was not representing reality as I understand or comprehend it. That would be like a very Pyrrhic victory. That would be like, I might as well be in a call center selling tampons if that's my job, or be in like an NSYNC cover band as a musician, let's say, just pandering or not representing my reality. Maybe that's your reality. Maybe you love NSYNC and you'd love to see a tribute, or maybe you really need affordable tampons, in which case I'm your guy. How you go about selecting the truth that you convey, because it doesn't arise from you. It's language that you're picking up from your environment. So what are you mimetically replicating? The truth that you embody and embrace should do the most benefit to the greatest truth that you know. That's sort of complicated, but I think a rule like that could actually be comprehensible to a modern existential lifestyle. To simply say to tell the truth or at least don't lie, I mean, I don't think that Jordan Peterson does that. I think he's taking a very deliberate selection process, and it's very curated. He says he's not a rhetorician, but I think a lot of it is sort of rhetoric, and it's to serve a purpose that I think is ethical in nature. I don't think it's just to make billions, or there's some nefarious motive behind it, or that he's like an alt-right shill or anything like that. But I do think that he could potentially be wrong about why he's selecting this or that thing. Let's go ahead and I'm actually, wow, I'm surprised that I'm hating these as much as I am. Maybe it's because I've got my critical lenses on, but I don't like the way it's phrased. It sounds kind of weaselish. It's not getting what the actual problem is and why people are not truthful, and the nature nurture of it, that some people are confused and being dishonest, and some people are being maliciously dishonest. very different things to my mind. I think that some people are grifters by nature, and maybe they could be conditioned out of that, but they are currently conditioned into a lifestyle of deliberately deceiving other people. It's like, don't be that person. Well, it's like, no shit, don't be that person. But anyone who would listen to you when you tell them to tell the truth, or at least don't lie, is someone who's already doing that. But I'm going to put this one in D tier as well. This one's going in D tier. I didn't come at this thinking that I was going to dislike these as much as I do. There's so many sources of X amount of things to keep in mind, right? And we're in this process of trying to like really narrow this down. That's why you would write the 4 agreements. Do you remember what they are? Are those the 4? Is this worthy of being one of 12 things that would be the most beneficial to keep in mind for me / for anyone? Would it benefit me to remind myself of any of these rules throughout the day? Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Sure, absolutely. Right? That's about it so far. I don't think that these are things I really need to hold in my mind. Let them crap out. My own personal favorite, Andrew Cohen's 5 tenets, which nobody's heard of. I think that those are 5 things that you should keep it, like everyone should keep in mind all the time. I think those are fantastic. So number 9, assume the person you're listening to might know something you don't. This one is one that I actually would benefit a great deal from, because I do fall into that trap. I tend to seek out intellectuals, interact with people who are try to get intellectual discussion going. I'm a person who talks about ideas above people and events, let's say. And it's so common to just find a person just sort of parroting something they heard on a source that I'm aware of. So it's like, okay, you're just doing the thing. Everybody wants to have something to say, but they don't really have anything original to say. And that's fine, spread the word of things that you're into. But in every case, you can always, there's definitely something that person could talk to you about that would fascinate you. I think that is just about always the case. Now, honing in on that thing, making them actually talk about it, that may be a first-class skill. So this is, again, something I always have to remind myself of. It's not natural to me to think this way. I will hear what the person's saying, and it'll increasingly annoy me. and not on purpose, but just because that's what the effect that it has on me. It's like, oh God, just stop with your contrails, just stop with your whatever it is, something that I'm familiar with. I'm not all that buying into it. The importance of Christianity to Western culture, I'm aware of it. I don't need more of it. I might be indicating that facially or verbally, and they're not getting the net. They just love to regurgitate this information. People keep telling me like it's going to blow my mind, like, well, you might be worried about the COVID vaccination. Oh, shit. Now my channel's completely shadow banned. No, but you might be, but actually this has nothing to do with COVID. This is about marketing. You might be worried about the COVID vaccination, but like when I was a kid, everyone had polio and then they had the vaccination and now nobody has. And this was something that was taught to them. Like they're mimicking something that they heard. It's clearly not every person who said that to me came up with it. You feel like it makes you look better to repeat something that was told to you as though I didn't know that. And I find it kind of offensive as someone who has always been afraid of the next black plague or white plague or nano plague. I would love to talk about what you actually have to contribute yourself. That would be the most interesting thing to talk about. This one struck me really hard one time when I was actually having a religious experience, coincidentally. And I was driving with my grandma, and I was sort of always irritated with her because she was an elderly woman and she was very concerned about like what I was eating and, the things that elderly women care about. We were best of friends. We hung out all the time, but I was critical of her for constantly being focused on these very mundane things, but she was a very intelligent woman. I'd sort of pinned myself. I was like, okay, well, let's not waste our time. I'm stuck in this car. We're going to be here like 2 hours. I started sort of probing her, like, what is your most interesting shit? Tell me about when the car came out. And she did. She's like, we were the first people on our, farm area that had a car. We would go and pick all the other kids up in our Model T and drive it. I'm like, wow, that shit's bad. And she doesn't care to share that with people. That's so long ago. It's not what she's focused on. All these things that were really fascinating to me that she would never bring up unless coaxed to. They're just not. And this tends to be the case with the elderly, I would say in general, that every elderly person, they might have a stick up their butt, they might be racist, they might be like somewhat senile, but they have had so much damn life experience. And if you can somehow, skillful means, somehow get out of them some nugget of wisdom, it's like always mind-blowing, because they have so much like benefit of hindsight and so much perspective on everything. Even if it's like an outdated or like warped perspective, it's just solid. It's like, it is what it is. And likewise, children, you know, very similarly, if I just start hanging out with a child, they don't give a fuck what I'm interested in. They don't care what I want to talk about. They're going to talk about whatever's on their mind. They're going to talk about their Pokemon. They're going to walk you through every Pokemon. But it's quite possible to get them talking about things that would really, really interest you, like what they're discovering about the world, how it seems to them. And they don't care to talk about that with you. That's not what they're focused on. So instead of just giving people the benefit of the doubt or the respect of thinking that what they're saying now might be important, more like treat every person like they have something, a secret nugget of treasure or wisdom within them that you could find if you yourself become more skillful at getting to that core with them, taking more agency in communication to getting it to be something more desirable is mutually beneficial. Like, even though the kid doesn't want to talk about like what school is like as much as they want to talk about their video game, once you do that, you have this situation where you're finally both engaged with one another. And that's sort of the purpose of, you know, it's what you're trying to achieve in a casual discussion. If you're sitting there just letting some windbag just fill you up, it's like, well, that's your problem. Why are you doing that? You know, because you could handle that in any number of ways, but you know, probably the best way would be to try and redirect to something that is more meaningful to you. You know, maybe if they are going off on some long-winded tangent, like maybe you could turn the heat up on it and get to the real core of it and get to some more interesting things. But as it is, number 9, I think it's good advice for me, and I think it's good advice for our generation, for the political issues that are kind of dividing us right now. I think, again, it's mostly the media's fault, but like, don't look toward the more radical, ridiculous positions as the foe of your position, but rather, you know, understand that we all kind of exist somewhere on a continuity from ridiculous to ridiculous, and most of us aren't at one of those ridiculous nodes, and that you would probably benefit greatly from hearing a more cogent and reasonable explanation of the side that you aren't particularly allied with or identified with. This is core to integral, is to recognize that everything that a group of people can believe is a native potential of yourself. So if it's very alien to you, or if it's very unacceptable to you, then you're repressing not another person, but actually a part of yourself. And it's something that you need to learn how to tame within yourself and within others. To, like, that would be the best thing to tackle that you could. So this one is going to be that rare. I'm going to put this one in S rank, because not that it's really a great rule of life, but that it's particularly applicable today to me, to the people that I interact with. I would say I think this is a great one, S rank. Number 10, be precise in your speech. This is straight out of the 4 agreements. Be impeccable with your word is one of the 4 agreements. I'm a person who's precise with my speech. It's very important to me, and it's very important to me that others are precise with their speech. But that's more of a stylistic thing. I don't think it's a rule for life. I think you could be more or less precise, and that could just be the nature of your character, and you could get by either way. It would be C, but I'm going to put it in D because it is a ripoff. Number 11, do not bother children while they're skateboarding. Oh boy, what does this mean? Okay, I get it. So when you love someone, you need to let them do things that are dangerous and could potentially harm them so that they'll learn. This doesn't mean like let your kid touch the stove or run out in the street, but it means let them stand up on something high and knowing that they're probably going to fall and hit their head on something and they're going to cry and you'll have to hug them. That's just how it goes. And if there's 1, you can't stop that, and 2, if you try to, they'll just sort of find you to be a bummer. When I got into skateboarding, do people still do that? Yeah, I guess. It seems like I don't see skateboards anymore, but maybe it's just because I don't go outside. When I started skateboarding, I was doing the ollie. I was just getting started. You kind of like push against the back and it makes the thing jump. And it's really hard to do actually when you're not that good at it. It's staying balanced and doing an ollie. So I was doing ollies over and over again in my garage, and I jumped up and I came off the board, and then I landed back on it. It slid out from under me, nailed my head on the concrete. I was like, holy shit, this is serious business. And I stopped skateboarding. That was a good lesson to learn. Some stuff, you can't just be reckless and expect things to always go okay. And our default setting as children and as warriors is to just find ourselves to be immortal until we do get hurt or we bleed a bunch. And it's probably better that you need some stitches or you need a cast put on than you get in a horrible serious accident where you don't make it out. Kind of grim. Again, this is a rule for life, but it's particularly to do with like parenting. Maybe he should have like a 12 rules for parenting or something, because rule for life should apply to like children too. Not terribly compelling. I don't really care about number 11. I'm gonna put that one, in the C tier. I'm tending to put these ones in D tier that I feel this way about, but I feel like that one's filling up. It's kind of lonely in the higher stretches and everything's going in. I'm just shitting all over them. All right, we'll give it a C just for balance's sake. And finally, pet a cat when you encounter one in the street. I think the sort of people who are, trying to turn their life around, the sort of people who are into this sort of thing, self-help, rules for life in general, they're in a certain age range, they're in a certain stage of life. They're overly focused on responsibility, success, and they're generally overworking themselves, whatever that means. Maybe there's no such thing as overworking yourself. This is to, say, like, allow yourself to just have those little sweet moments that occur spontaneously and don't try to disrupt them. And this one is actually decent advice for me. I do get that sort of tunnel vision about things that I'm doing, and I can kind of suffer from burnout because I don't really take the time to enjoy what I'm doing or to relish the doing of it or the not doing of it. Even like when I'm working on a video, I will not take pleasure in eating. I'll just make food really quick and just cram it down my throat, get the calories, go, so I don't get a headache. Life moves pretty fast. It might go past you if you don't stop to check it out once in a while. Is that what Ferris Bueller said? Something like that. And I don't know, why not 10? I think we could have cut the last 2, maybe. We could have cut a lot of these, really. I like it, though. It's cute. It's cute on a list of things that are mostly not very cute. And so I'm going to, I think this might be the only one who's going to get a B. Let's put that one in B tier. Okay, so having done all of this terrible project, to my mind, I'm not that fascinated or captivated with this movement of kind of what they call, I guess a lot of them self-refer as like the intellectual dark web. It's like people who are bringing back mystical concepts and existential concepts into like a more modern framework and commenting on the social division that's occurring as a result of communications technology being at the forefront, social media being so important to human life, and the internet and cell phones being so important to human life, creating a new technological base, a new sort of intellectual character that is dangerous and divisive, it would seem. What I'm trying to say with a lot of this stuff is that I feel like the work that these people are doing has already been done. This is what Ken Wilber did throughout his career and continues to do. And it's so strange to me that he's not being brought into this discussion. Like Peterson is apparently unaware of Wilber. I find that hard to believe if you're like a Jungian and you're into Piaget and development. It's like you've never, and religion and reconciling East and West and all that, like you've never heard of Wilber, really? He's not that popular, so maybe so, but it just seems to me like if Peterson was aware of Wilber, he'd be like, oh my God, like everything I'm doing, it's already been done. Like this has been paved. I should just jump on board. Like I should be modifying Wilber's work rather than starting a new thing that's doesn't have like clear definitions, doesn't have the clarity of what Wilber's done. It may be like actually more, the presentation might actually be better, but the clarity isn't there. Why doesn't Peterson acknowledge the existence of this? Is he unaware of it? Is it a rhetoric thing? Like, doesn't make sense to me because it's like it just seems like a hell of a time saver. And now that this stuff is actually becoming popularized and people are becoming aware of all these things that we're talking about, this clash of worldviews and the clash of East and West, and it's becoming sort of commonplace for people to be thinking about these things. I'm just astonished that it's this new generation of people who are just figuring it out as they go, rather than looking back at the people who have already done this work. What I'm mostly focused on is why in the world he would pretend to be unaware of Wilbur. It seems, or why he wouldn't be. Maybe could someone tell him? Maybe by combining the Peterson and Wilbur things together, it would be a more balanced thing. I think there's a sort of imbalance to the Peterson thing that's sort of frightening to both sides, to people who are like with him and against him. And I think Wilbur handled it. Maybe that's why Wilbur isn't as accepted, because it's a more academic, dry, straightforward approach to the problem. And it's not as incendiary. It's not as like, it's not angry, and people like that visceral reaction. So I don't know. That's my take on all this, and that's why I started talking about Peterson on a channel that has largely been about Integral and Wilbur so far. I'm here to talk about transcendental mysticism, existentialism, and memetics, worldviews as encapsulated by meta memeplexes. I get bored listening to Peterson because he refuses to bring in terminology from systems, and it's like he's reinventing the wheel every single time he talks about anything. He's like starting over from scratch and baking a cake from like rudiments of thought, instead of just being like, okay, that's all encapsulated in this idea or this thinker. But instead constantly unraveling Nietzsche, which is something you can do, constantly unraveling Jung, which is something you can do, instead of just like, yeah, existentialism's a thing, archetypes are a thing, though they're in a category, they do this, they behave this way, a more systemic approach. That's kind of where I find a lot of this discourse tedious and unnecessary. And I'm not a fan of tedious and unnecessary intellectual discourse. I'm like, can we please simplify this? Can we please get to where we're going and stop just like pointlessly debating about little things that are unknown? Anyways, hope you enjoyed it. Catch you on the flip. I'm getting kind of tired now. I'm very thankful for everyone who has been curious about what I'm doing. So namaste to you, internet, and I'll see you next time.